easier. First of all, I would like to thank you all for coming here. I'm very glad to be here at the University of Chicago for the third time. And I'm particularly glad from all the places, and I had a chance to visit quite a few, mostly very prestigious universities like this one, but also institutes like the Getty Conservation Institute in Los Angeles, and also other private visits that I have made during my stay as a Fulbright Scholar at the University of Pennsylvania. It's precisely here that I come back after a year of time lab, because Chicago and this particular place are my favorite places in the States, and this is not to flatter you, but I'm trying to be as honest as possible. And why is this so? It's another story, but however, I'm particularly glad that this thing has worked out. We've planned this with Meredith for a long time now, right? Meredith for a year and a half. It took some time, but it worked out, and I'm very, very glad, and I hope that I will be able to come again and continue this all the exchange that I have personally with the University of Chicago. My context with Chicago does not limit itself to the University of Chicago. I gave a lecture at the Art Institute, at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago on heritage preservation, and this cooperation is also going to proceed, and I'm very happy about it. So now back to the photos. I need to tell one thing which was not mentioned, that the project initially consisted of photos that were taken in Bulgaria as well. And since I arrived in the States following the Macedonian failure through the Macedonian government exchange program between the Macedonian and the US government, I, with the permission of the French cultural centers in the Balkans, I separated the two exhibitions, and I took the Macedonian part, and this is what you are seeing here today. However, the exhibition in its original form is being presented right now in Bulgaria, in Russe. For those who don't know, this is one of the important cultural centers in Bulgaria on the Danube, close to Bucharest, and it's going to be presented in Trnovo, in the center of Bulgaria next winter, this coming winter in a few months. And in the exhibition, in which the central part is going to be the Macedonian part, which is presented here, is going to travel in Montevideo next year, early next year, at the National Gallery in Montevideo in Uruguay, and I'm very happy about it. I have to say that I could not possibly imagine that this particular exhibition and project would provoke such an interest outside of Europe, because the show has never been shown in France itself. But that makes the fun and the joy of it even bigger. And this is something which is very important when one is engaged in project, in particularly in this kind of project which marries different aspects. Because for me, as a preservationist, obviously because I spend most of my time working on preservation on sacred medieval sites, it means I've been working on preservation mostly as a manager, which is quite a difficult thing to do in Macedonia these days, of medieval churches and mosques, and this is precisely what you see here in the photos. But my idea was with this work, was to go a little bit out of this context, or as much as possible, and to do a personal project. Because I started, apart from this, working on photography, and I've been doing this in the last 10 years. So I thought that the time has come to kind of marry these two different things and try to make some kind of synthesis in a way. I thought of this today while some of you were asking me questions about how did it happen that the French got involved into this project. And actually I think that their motivation was quite different, because their motivation was to have someone make a repertoire of as much as heritage in the Balkans as possible in the fastest and the cheapest way. And the easiest way to do it was to find someone like me and do it. Because it does give an idea of what the heritage of the Balkan is. My motivation was obviously not the same. And speaking about heritage, is in terms of preservation, is that what it makes us interesting, and why we want to preserve these sites, is that we want to do that because of their cultural value. The cultural value of heritage sacred sites, or heritage sites, cultural heritage in general, is because it has very important cultural values, aspects of cultural meanings, which are its historical, artistic, religious, social, and other kind of values. As a preservationist, what I normally do is I try to make hierarchy of these values. Because most of the sites, particularly the most important sites, and these are the sites we want to preserve the most, are important not because of one aspect. There are always several aspects, or many aspects. So it's very important to make hierarchy of these values as regarding to what the community, or the owner, or the user of the site, what is important for at the moment, a specific moment of time, and starting from there, to build up a heritage conservation project. However, apart from this heritage preservation methodology, if I may call it so, this, the time and the sacred, is I hope out of this context, well, I wanted it out to be out, because it is, I did not apply this kind of methodology when choosing the sites. I just went to the sites and photographed the sites, the one that attracted me the most deeply, and for me the most important aspect was the religious or the spiritual aspect, and this is what I wanted to project. But of course, as I believe these photos touch people in a different way, this is up to the individuals, to the visitors, to see and set up their own hierarchy of aspects, why these photos are, hopefully if they are, interesting, because they show history, meaning, politics, or because they show particularly the spiritual aspect. So coming from, starting from a general, collective, very serious hierarchy of values, such as what we want the heritage, understanding of heritage, cultural heritage to be, I wanted to individualize this aspect through these photos, so that these photos can be understood in individual terms. And if I have succeeded in this, then it's a big success for me, because for me they are personal. So if someone asks me what is the difference between the documentation and making arts out of heritage, that would be my answer. Because heritage, everybody has its own personal heritage, but when we think of cultural heritage, we think of as a collective value reflecting to the community to which this heritage belongs. Whereas, as I said, these photos for me are personal. Well, there are a lot of aspects of the heritage itself which is interesting, and we can talk about it if you're interested. As far as this intervening aspect of heritage art, this is what I had to say. So thank you, and if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Andre, I'm not a historical scholar by any means, but I get the sense that some of the churches are now being occupied as Christian institutions. I'm curious about if some of these are from the 16th century, 15th century. What is the life? Can you talk about the life of some of the buildings, their transformations from one faith to another, or between political regimes, so that we get a sense of how they survived, and why they weren't torn down, and where they're located.
Sure. Well, you know, it is as in like in most of the religions and most of the histories of sacred histories in the world, in the history of the sacred histories, there is a continuity of the space of the place where sacred sites have existed, and they have existed on the same site, and then they've been destroyed repeatedly and reconstructed one on top of each other, with some exceptions. One big exception from what I know is as this country here, because this is not what happened in the United States of America, the way related to the Native Americans who were living here. But apart from that, especially in the Eurasian space, there is a very, from what I know of, there is a very strong tradition, and Macedonia really represents this case. You can see here, but not in a simple way, let's to say the Ottomans arrived and they reconverted the churches into mosques. It is far more complex than that. It is, for example, there is a photo here showing a mosque. It's right in the center, not in a very hidden place, in the most visited city in Macedonia, which is Ohrid, the city which is like claimed to be the city of UNESCO, the only tourist place in the country. And right in the heart of the city, there is this mosque, and there is a cross on the minaret that is because, and the Ottomans existed, allowed the Christian community, which was very strong in Ohrid as it is today, to build, to have this cross on the top of the minaret, and so it's been. It's a very, it's a wonderful example of coexistence, and of, well, it's not even coexistence, as of a parallel existence of different things at one's place. The aspect of place is very important, both in sacred histories, in religious terms, and both in terms of heritage preservation, obviously. Because we want to preserve, we call it the sense of the place. But what is the sense of the place, if not its spirituality? It projects, concentrated in one particular space in a long period of time. Obviously, there's other example which shows recent destructions of sites, and fortunately, these destructions have been, sacred sites have been very limited in Macedonia. Yes, please.
Are all of these sites active sacred sites now?
Yes, yes. By any means, I didn't want to go to the sites who were not active religiously, because, as I said, my main motivation of a thrill to go and visit the sites. And this particular project was the spiritual aspect. So, in a site, religious site which is not alive spiritually, the spirituality is abandoned. At least that is what we understand in Eastern Christianity and in Islam, the way I see it. Can be restored, but while the site is abandoned, the spirituality is abandoned as well, because this representative need a house of God, as we are here in this chapel, to so that the communication between man and God can be established and preserved. Yes.
As you mentioned, this artistic project coincided with your work in preservation, and I was wondering, what do you see as being the key threats to these places of worship from a preservation viewpoint?
Yeah, well, there are quite a few, but there is one very, as I see, very distinctive, as the recent bad conservation done from Yugoslavian times and so to say communist time, but due to modernistic principles, this relates only to the churches. The churches, medieval churches, have been treated like modern apartment buildings, and the original medieval roofs have been systematically replaced by reinforced concrete roofs. And these reinforced concrete roofs have made considerable damage on the frescoes. It's very hard to take them off, as you can imagine, and nothing has been done to reverse this process. Hopefully, nobody is doing this anymore, from what I know, so this is already something. And we are working to get some aid in expertise, in technical expertise, as to find out what is there to be done. And it's not simple. I will have an article published on this in the Journal of Architecture Conservation, because in London in November now. So try to attract some specialists.
Is this just a sample of sites around, or are there a lot of sites that have been abandoned over the years between communism and World War II and changes in secularization, stuff like that? There are a lot of other sites around there that are not being used as sacred sites now that are similar, or are these what there is?
No, there are much more. Unfortunately, there has never been. I've made some investigation. It's not that easy, although the country is so small, as one could imagine, but my conclusion is that there has never ever been a catalog, inventory of the medieval churches, for example. There is one of medieval mosques, which I think is quite well done. And there is a book published by the Islamic community of Macedonia, which repertories also the mosques that do no longer exist. But nothing like that for churches. Why is this so? Because a church is considered as something very valuable in the communist system of Yugoslavia. At least in Macedonia, they were redistributed evenly between different regions, following the communist idea that everybody has to have an even part of something. It might sound cynical, but I think it's important once you ask the question to explain what was going on. And which means there is no central register. As in the process of transition, and the country is having extremely hard time in this process, these registers are simply not available to be consulted. So if you want to find out what's been going on, you have to make a project now to go into these 6-7 places, some of them very kind of like in very difficult situation now, economical, social, and whatever. Although the institutions still exist, and try to find out what has been done. So my conclusion is that there is no such a thing. So we do not know, at the first place, how many of the sites, how many medieval churches and monasteries exist in the country. And but I would say then most of these sites are still now active in independent Macedonia, for sure. But we do not know the number because we do not know the first number. So well, I don't know what is there to do first. There's so much to do. So apart from making photos and making art. The church itself, which is the owner of the sites, has been very busy in re-establishing monastic lives in the abandoned monasteries. Yeah.
Is separate from the other Orthodox?
Yes. But because it has been recognized by many, particularly by more powerful church of the neighboring countries' churches, it is a problem that is known as the country has. So I don't think really the church is to blame that cannot undertake such kind of efforts, especially when, with this kind of problems, when the church is absolutely not to blame, is the communist state, which is no longer there. So it is a very complex issue. Yes?
Does there exist any kind of legislation to encourage independent organizations to take care of these places?
No. At the contrary, the former government, we've just, for the first time in 16 years, well, I didn't want to speak about politics, but once you ask the questions, we have, the way I see it, for the first time, a government which is not communist. Before, it was all the time. And the last government, just before the election, some people wrote a charter which encouraged centralization although the heritage no longer belongs to the state, and this is what is still valid now. So actually, we have in form of documents now that institutionalize the centralization of state. It's very crazy, and that is the valid law. And the government now is kind of like very young, yuppie people. They're very much into economics, and this is not their priority, obviously. But that is not really a problem. The problem is the situation on the sites, because once you want to do it, it's more or less possible to find ways how to do it, because it is no longer property of the state.
So they wouldn't face the issues that are happening in Italy, where the laws are so tough that you can't get anything done.
I don't think so, well, at least luckily not. But they're not encouraging anything, and they're particularly not encouraging neither a non-government organization to work on heritage, and neither, which is worse, in this case, at least like Macedonia, neither a private organizations from the country or outside to invest and sponsor these works at all. There is laws for sports and I don't know what else, but not for heritage conservation, in the law for heritage conservation. So hopefully this is going to change, but that's how it is now. So this is what my motive is also, to do this kind of work, because it's the easiest way to come, for me to come to Chicago and speak to you about this, because otherwise it's such a long thing, you know, because you have to do a project and it has to be successful, and not necessarily, people that work in heritage preservation, well, I don't know. My experience is, it is very often that they don't, for example, they sponsor some kind of work, and they want to present very often their work or part of the work as it was their own work, although someone else did it and they only funded the project. These are very complex issues and very delicate ones. It becomes more and more complicated as heritage conservation becomes more and more in the center of public interest all around the world and becomes more and more politicized. Yes?
To what extent is the damage that your photographs document due to deliberate actions on the part of, for example, state actors or individuals?
State actors have done no action of deliberate destruction that I know of at all. Not a single one. There has been deliberate action of destruction. There's one photo showing it during the conflict 2001, yes. But the damage was limited. There has been, this is a site which has not been documented at all, but not before, so we don't know really how much of the original fabric was there. There's one very important church which was quite damaged. But it's not presented here, that church, because it's not accessible still now.
So most of the damage that we see in these photos is that of wind and rain and perhaps poor maintenance?
No, most of the damage that you see is due to bad conservation, but not intentional bad conservation.
I understand.
And what?
Conservation. Like this here. This is not due to rain or maintenance. This is due, this hose is far away, but you can see it. This is due to bad conservation because they've introduced cement layers. Well, I don't want to into the technicality of this, quite complex, but yeah, so this is nothing to do with maintenance or abandon. This is due to bad conservation. You know, this is not something, well, I would be a little bit, this is not something which was done only in Yugoslavia. In the 50s and the 60s, this kind of things with reinforced concrete were done all around the world, a lot of them in the US. I've seen, or here in America, I've seen a wonderful 16th century church restored and now in Puerto Rico, and not only once, number of times, San Juan, number of times, groups of so-called conservationists or architects or whatever were introducing layers and layers of concrete in this church. They have totally destroyed the church. So this is not something which was only in, this was very strong in the 50s and the 60s. The problem with Yugoslavia was, whereas the world moved forward, it stayed stuck in this modernity because the system married modernity and it's embraced it totally and couldn't go any further because further meant back and destruction. That's what happened. Well, that's my interpretation, but.
On one of the pictures it looked like the faces of the icons were carved out. And you see this through northern Greece, for example, in the conquest. People carved the faces of the icons. Is that an example of deliberate destruction?
Which one do you think specifically? You have to show me because this is very tricky.
Which one was it?
Because I don't see things like this here.
Here. Maybe it's. Like
Yeah, maybe.
the faces are. You see, they're kind of. All of them. Not all of the low ones. Not the high ones, just the low ones that are reachable. The center of the face is totally wiped.
There is another explanation for this. Unfortunately, not enough research has been done, which says that in the tradition, when you touch the face of the saint, it is that you can communicate with him. So, particularly touching the saint makes
One thing about that, though, is that throughout northern Greece, you see these churches, and you know, and the people know that's when it happened.
Yeah, sure, it did happen. There's another thing, but this, I think, there's a particular thing also with the eyes, where the eyes have been, how you say this in English, chucked out.
Far away from touching. But I mean, there's also the Christian iconoclasts, and I can't remember what centuries they were. Does anybody here remember?
These icons would have been after.
It's after that.
After that.
Yeah. No, I think the both of the explanations are valid, but I don't know to which extent the people can remember exactly, because it must have been a long time ago.
People forget in that part of the world?
No. Historically, no. I mean, I'm just intrigued. No, they don't forget. But you know, because the Ottomans were there for 5 centuries.
Right.
It's a very long period of time. Unless this destruction was done in the latest, that makes it logical, in the last period of the reign.
I would almost think in the earliest.
No. That's definitely not, because when the Ottomans came, there was the moment when they were the most tolerant. This is based on historical facts. But it is particularly in the latest period of time when there were these destructions and, you know, burned villages and whole cities burned down and a lot of people killed, and in Greece and also in northern Macedonia and Albania and things like that. And this, I imagine one could imagine this is much easier to understand, that people would remember that, but this because this would happen like early 19th century or throughout the 19th century, whereas would not refer to the period where these churches were painted. That's really, because this is really medieval what we are speaking here. I would tend to say that for me it's hard to imagine that these things happened in medieval times. Let's put it that way.
Correlated with what happened in
Yes. So in medieval times I would imagine more, I think like that with the cross on the minaret. Because it's very hard to imagine that particularly half of these churches are in Ohrid, that someone would be allowing to have a cross on the minaret and doing things like that. Myself, I think, as again...
The issue is the image. I mean...
Yes, but it's also very difficult to imagine to have the most powerful Christian symbol on the top of the minaret. You would agree with that, wouldn't you? So that would be my answer. But again, unfortunately, this has not been an issue of research. Not at all, which is can be very surprising. But the problem is due to the fact that Macedonia did not have the chance to create its national state, unlike the other Balkan countries. There was not a particular period of time long enough so that the community could appropriate these churches as their own, which happened in Bulgaria and Serbia, respectively, for example. And that is a reason that this is happening right now. So this might seem very strange even to some extent, because the people were still Christian Orthodox as they were at that time, but there were different people. The church divided Byzantine, there were Serbian kings, Bulgarian kings, but this was all around the place. But the question of ownership has an origin, has a different meaning in Macedonia than you have in any other country, I would say, or any other space in the Balkans and in the whole of the Orthodox world, for sure. Yeah.
Well, do we have any more questions? Well, anything else? I think we can all thank Pance Velkov for giving us a
Thank you.
presentation about his work.